lose a little money, but if they're parking under the cliff and they want to go to 1,200 or have the ability to go to 1,200, then it's advantageous. for them. So, but I'm just going to absolutely defer every question about costs. I know nothing about that. You got late notice on this one?
Well, we were just kind of working back and forth on seeing if we could get one of my members to testify. That's kind of complicated
Okay.
on this issue, so it's better to give them cover and
Good.
channel their thoughts.
Good.
And I guess that's why we exist. So
Right.
it's all good.
Right. Wonderful.
We're actually having the Disability Equality Index. We're having a reception in the subcommittee's hearing room later this month, just so that they can have that one-on-one opportunity to meet some of these companies. Now, obviously, these companies, just because you get 100 doesn't mean that they're there yet.
Right.
It means that they're committed and that they're striving to do better.
Right. Exactly.
And even if you got 100, you got a lot of work to do.
Right.
So, but it's it's a carrot, not a stick.
Yeah.
And it's they're competitive.
Right.
So they're calling and saying why weren't we on the index?
Right.
I met with a company yesterday that said we don't want to take it till we can get 100. Because some of our competitors did well. So. Nice guy.
A little bit long here. Hey.
I'll
See you in a bit. Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
Still how.
Those are not live.
This is my third meeting this morning.
Hey,
already.
this is probably my
Jesus
fourth.
Christ, I'm meted out.
You got a long, just getting started. Committee will come to order. I think we have most of our members present. This is our first full committee hearing on Social Security since 2008. Our goal here is to get ahead of the curve. As we all know, the Disability Insurance Trust Fund, it runs out of money next year. And that means if we do nothing, under current law, everybody on the program will see a 20% benefit cut. Now, Subcommittee Chair Sam Johnson, along with the ranking member, Mr. Becerra, they've been working on solutions all year long. And a few months back, Mr. Johnson laid out 4 principles for reforming DI, all of which I fully endorse. First, no 20% cut. Stop that from happening. Not going to happen. Second, make sure that all the benefits are paid on time. Third, make the program work better. Fourth, help people who can and want to work get back to work. This is the last point. The last point here I want to dwell on, because Chairman Johnson and his team have been looking at how to strengthen the DI program. And what they've found is the rules actually make it harder for people to work more. Here's the crux of it. If you just make $1 more than you are allowed, you get kicked off the program. In other words, it is a lot safer to stay on the sidelines. It's no surprise then that only 0.5% earn enough to get off the program. The program is way too complex. If you want to work, and 40% of the recipients reportedly do, there are all sorts of rules and regulations that you have to follow. To give you an idea, here's a chart on work incentives from the Social Security Administration. If looking at this chart makes your head hurt, then you're not the only one. We need to reboot our thinking here. Later this month, we will celebrate the 25th anniversary of passing the Americans with Disabilities Act. And I agree that a disability should in no way diminish a person's right to fully participate in all aspects of our society. And that should be the spirit of DI. It will be there for you if you can't work. But if you want to work, we don't want to get in the way. We should recognize that everybody has something to offer. Everybody can contribute, and we should encourage that. So I want to make clear to members on both sides of this dais that we are not here to cut DI. We are here to strengthen disability insurance. That's our mission. I also want to thank our witnesses for joining us here today. Every one of you here brings a unique perspective on disability insurance, and we're very interested in hearing your perspective. So I want to thank you again for taking the time to share your expertise. And I just want to say to my friends on the other side of the aisle, we want your ideas as well. We want to work together. We want to come up with a bipartisan solution. So let's get to it. And with that, I want to recognize the ranking member for any opening statement that he'd like to make.
Thank you very much. Today's hearing is on work incentives for Americans who qualify for Social Security because of a severe disability, illness, or injury. 9 million Americans and 2 million of their spouses and children currently receive Social Security disability insurance. All Americans pay into SDI. I want to emphasize that. So that one accident or one diagnosis doesn't mean a lifetime of poverty. In order to qualify for SSDI, disabled workers have to prove that their condition is so severe that it prevents them from working at a self-supporting level and will last for more than a year. They must also provide evidence to the Social Security Administration that they've worked long enough to qualify for their benefits. On average, SSDI recipients worked hard and paid into the program for 22 years, before receiving benefits. Despite the severity of their impairments, Some of these Americans with disabilities continue to make efforts to work, and we should continue to support their efforts while not harming those who cannot. Congress has created special benefit rules in Social Security called work incentives. These rules are designed to encourage work by giving individuals time to test whether they can work at a self-supporting level before their benefits end. Before Congress enacted these work incentive rules, many disabled Americans were afraid to even try to return to work, fearing they could lose their Social Security just for trying. In addition to these work incentives, Congress has also created a wide range of other programs designed to assist disabled Americans to work. The Ticket to Work program, enacted on a bipartisan basis in 1999, provides services to help Social Security beneficiaries understand the impact of work on their benefits and get the employment support they need to be successful. The federal state vocational rehabilitation program, which is not in our committee's jurisdiction, helps people retrain for new work if they cannot do their old job. I hope there'll be now displayed a chart. Let's see if modern technology works. It does. As you can see, this is a chart on the return to work experience. Even with the supportive services, vocational retraining, and special benefit rules, only about 15% of beneficiaries have any earnings within 5 years of qualifying for Social Security. Many attempt to work but are not able to sustain a job because of their impairment. Of those who do, most are only able to work part-time or for very low pay, earning less than $750 a month. Under current law, those individuals are able to keep all of their earnings to help support themselves. As seen in this chart, a very small fraction, about 4%, mostly younger workers, are able to earn enough to work their way off of Social Security. So, and I emphasize this, as our committee reviews the Social Security Disability Insurance Program and considers improvements, it's important that we know the full facts and not rely on anecdotes. I'd like to repeat that. It is important that we know the full facts and not rely on anecdotes. We should do so with an understanding that all of us support combating fraud. Indeed, Mr. Becerra and Mr. Johnson have similar proposals, although a key difference is whether we provide the resources needed to make the proposals work. And we should do so understanding the power of work. People want to work both because of the earnings and the dignity that comes with having a job. So I just want to emphasize as we proceed, we need to understand the facts and understand who are the people, the vast majority of people who are now on Social Security disability and who have gone back to work, and because of their disability, for how long they can work. Social Security disability insurance plays a vital role in the lives of millions. I hope we can work together to make sure that it continues to be there for all Americans. I yield back.
Thank you. I would like to just invite the witnesses to paraphrase your remarks to conform with the 5 minutes. Your full written statement will be included as a part of the record. And Mr. Ssdi, why don't we start with you?
Good morning, Chairman Ryan and Ranking Member Levin from Michigan, as I am, and members of the Ways and Means Committee. I'm honored to speak to you today regarding barriers to work actually caused by our Social Security Disability Insurance System, which I'll call DI. I'm the president of the Disability Network, a company that provides services and supports to thousands of people in Flint and Genesee County. I'm also a paraplegic, use a wheelchair, who's benefited from and been frustrated with disability insurance policies. My experience with DI began 36 years ago following an auto accident that took me out of the workforce for several months as I went through surgery and rehab at Craig Hospital in Denver. I was a senior vice president of a bank holding company at the time, and while at Craig, I was encouraged to apply for DI benefits because I had a significant disability that could affect my ability to work, and after all, like you, I had paid for disability insurance coverage. So even though I wanted to return to work, my company wanted me back, nothing was certain. So I was awarded DI and received a benefit of about $800 a month, which is not a meaningful wage. With a family, I had 7 children at the time. So after months of rehab, I gradually returned to full-time work, and when I informed Social Security that I was going back to work, they told me that I was beginning a trial work period, and if successful, my DI benefits would stop. It didn't make much sense to me. The remarkable paradox was that Social Security strongly encouraged me to return to work right after I told them that I was injured seriously enough to affect my ability to return to work. It just didn't make sense. So eventually, the DI check stopped coming, including an overpayment, which I paid back, and that's a whole other story. My career continued until I founded the Disability Network, an organization where we believe the best way to lift people out of poverty and not be poor is gainful employment. People with disabilities need supports from organizations and companies like us, and DI policies that encourage employment and have an expectation of work. Why would we require people to pay for federal disability insurance to help them in the event of a disabling condition that affects their ability to work, and then penalize them if they do work and make a meaningful wage? When people with disabilities access the very benefit we require them to pay, we immediately take it away when they earn more than a so-called substantial gainful activity, SGA, about $1,000 a month, which is not substantial. Most people would call this a cliff, a poverty wage activity, rather than a substantial gainful activity, because it does not allow for a meaningful income. This is especially true when the cash benefit is commonly used for products or services related to our disability, like aids to daily living or transportation or personal assistant care. So I strongly encourage you to consider a proposal to ramp off the current wage cliff associated with SGA that prevents people from the American dream of independence and freedom. Our policies discourage work, force people into spectator stands, watching the world go by, and we know life is not a spectator sport. We need people in the game, in the economy, working, all of our people. And unfortunately, because of these DI policies, they're not even on our talent bench. A recent study, ACS from Cornell, showed that there are 500,000 working age people with disabilities in Michigan who are not working, and yet 43% of them have a college education or degree. What is wrong with this picture? Leaders from across the nation, you'll hear today, like Randy Lewis from Walgreens, Rick Keyes from Meyer in Michigan, Jeannie Stone from Trigicon, are publicly stating that they want to hire not only people with disabilities, 20%. They have a quota of doing that. They see the talent, dependability, motivation, and improved workforce that occurs when people with disabilities are back in the workforce. It's hard to imagine a cost-neutral, simple way to change DI policies, and yet, at the same time, it's common sense that working people with DI will pay back a portion on that 2-to-1 sliding scale, pay back the actual benefit they're receiving. So you have the opportunity to make a difference to replace a fear-driven, poverty-entrapping system with a simple ramp-off change. Don't let our intended safety net system continue to actually trap people in a poverty net like a spider web rather than help them bounce back to work like a trampoline. So thank you for this opportunity to appear before you today, and I look forward to any questions you may have.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very well said. I appreciate your comments. Mr. Smith.
Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the committee, thank you for this opportunity to talk to you about a major work disincentive built into the Social Security Disability Insurance, or SSDI, program. My name is James Smith, and I work for the Vermont Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Over the years, my staff and I have talked with thousands of SSDI beneficiaries about returning to work. Based on our experience, the SSDI program rules do not make work pay. In fact, they do the opposite. They discourage work and encourage dependence. In particular, I'm referring to the so-called SSDI cash cliff. The cash cliff works as follows. After a 9-month trial work period and a 3-month grace period, if a beneficiary earns a single dollar over the so-called substantial gainful activity, or SGA level, $1,090 per month, that single dollar results in a complete loss of the SSDI cash benefit. It also could result in loss of eligibility for the program altogether. In my written testimony, I share Susan's story. Despite her severe mental illness and repeated hospitalizations, Susan worked with VR to try to go to work. At first, she was careful to keep her earnings below the cash cliff level because she received a benefit for herself and her dependent child. In 2014, she was offered a supervisory role that would have put her earnings over the SGA cash cliff. She was thrilled to be recognized for her good work. However, she understood that taking the promotion would result in a net loss in her total income that she simply could not afford. She did not take the promotion and is currently keeping her earnings below the cash cliff. She's only in her 40s, and I suspect she will never leave the SSDI rolls. The obvious alternative to the SSDI cash cliff is a gradual $1 for $2 earnings offset, just like the SSI program. A 1 for 2 offset would gradually reduce the SSDI benefit as the beneficiary increases earnings. So the beneficiary is always better off the more they work. There is research to support this approach. Data from a 4-state pilot study, including Connecticut, Wisconsin, Utah, and my state, Vermont, provides clear evidence that an earnings offset for SSDI would result in increased earnings above SGA. Overall, the study showed an offset led to a 25% increase in the number of beneficiaries working above the SGA or cash cliff amount. In my written testimony, I shared Donna's story to show what the offset meant to one beneficiary. Donna was diagnosed with stage 3 melanoma. Because of the severity of her illness, she was not expected to survive. Donna made multiple attempts to return to work through 4 separate reoccurrences of her illness. In 2013, she was able to access a 1 for 2 offset through the Benefit Offset National Demonstration. The offset allowed Donna to work at a level that her health allowed and keep a portion of her benefits. It also gave her extra income to help her children through college. Donna was recently offered a job with the Veterans Administration at a level that will zero out her SSDI benefit. So how do we improve the SSDI work incentives for people like Donna and Susan and be cost-effective to the trust fund? First, to implement a graduated $1 for $2 earnings offset to always make work pay. Second, start the offset at a threshold of less than this substantial gainful activity or cash cliff level to generate savings to the program. Right now, Social Security pays 100% of a beneficiary's benefit unless the beneficiary earns above the SGA threshold. Therefore, most work activity does not result in any savings to the program. Starting an offset at less than SGA would be more likely to generate savings to the program, just like the SSI program. Third, eliminate the trial work period. Right now, Social Security pays 100% of the benefit during the 9-month trial work period, regardless of how much a beneficiary is earning. With an offset, savings could be generated from the first month the beneficiary goes to work, just like the SSI program. Finally, allow beneficiaries continued attachment to the SSDI program regardless of how much they work, as long as they continue to be medically eligible. Disability can be unstable and unpredictable. Beneficiaries like Donna and Susan may have periods of time when they can work full-time and other periods of time when they may not be able to work at all. Continued attachment will give beneficiaries the security they need to try work without the fear of being completely cut off. So in summary, the current SSDI work rules provide a powerful disincentive to work. In contrast, our proposed changes would support return to work by always making work pay, potentially save money by eliminating the trial work period and starting the offset at a point less than SGA, and provide security to beneficiaries who want to try to increase their work activity. Such an approach would provide people like Donna and Susan a chance for a better life despite the challenges of living with a severe disability. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today.
Thank you. Ms. Houghton, did I pronounce it correctly?
You did.
All right, thank you.
Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Levin, and members of this committee, thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony today. My name is Jill Houghton. I lead an organization called the U.S. Business Leadership Network. We are a national, nonpartisan, business-to-business network focused on the premise that business responds to their peers and can teach each other how to include people with disabilities across the business. We have more than 50 BLN affiliates across the nation. We represent more than 5,000 businesses. And I'm here to tell you that countless companies across this nation are recognizing that there is a value to include people with disabilities, to in jobs earn the same pay, work side by side, and be held to the same standards. My testimony is grounded in my professional experience working with these businesses who represent the demand side of the employment equation, as well as my personal experience. I'm married to a gentleman with a spinal cord injury who's one of the people that worked his way off of the Social Security Disability Insurance Program. In preparation for my testimony, we reached out to our members, and here's what they had to say. One of the greatest challenges that they face is finding the qualified candidates with disabilities that can do the job with or without accommodation. That's a really complicated matter, but if we dig through it, there's a couple things that come to mind. One, it's very hard for business to navigate government and all of the sea of nonprofit organizations out there. But secondly, it's also hard for them to understand that the Social Security Disability Insurance Program eligibility requirements do not appear to be supportive of individuals that want to remain employed or increase their hours worked. Now, while the SSDI program provides a very vital, important safety net to those with disabilities that meet the eligibility requirements, the complexity of the rules appear to cause some individuals who want to remain employed to reduce or limit their hours worked, to limit their earnings, and to, in some instances, quit their jobs. In fact, we hear regularly from mid-level managers that are really perplexed. They don't know how to help their employees. Now, while our members are not experts on the SSDI program, they'd be the first to admit that there are significant obstacles that these beneficiaries face related to losing program eligibility, loss of health care benefits, and fear of overpayments. These type of challenges inhibit businesses' ability to recruit and hire people with disabilities. And this is a really large growing problem because many of these companies are federal contractors. And they're subject to the new Section 503 regulations that were issued by the U.S. Department of Labor, Office of Federal Contract Compliance Programs. Now, this new regulation basically encourages federal contractors to set a utilization goal, to set a goal that 7% of their workforce across job groups be people with disabilities. And this they have to hold themselves accountable, and if they don't meet this goal, then they have to show that they're going to fix this goal. And while this isn't a bad thing, it's not a bad thing, and countless companies are trying to do better, we need Congress to make the SSDI program work better for the beneficiaries and to promote opportunity for those who want to work. This, in turn, is going to help our members to hire people with disabilities. From an opportunity perspective, I'd just like to call your attention to the fact that we created a Disability Equality Index in partnership with the American Association of People with Disabilities. This is a benchmarking tool. It's an aspirational recognition tool that we're using to help corporate America advance their disability inclusion. We launched the first annual DEI, and 80 Fortune 1000 companies participated. 19 of those companies that participated received 100. Now, 100 doesn't connotate perfection, but what it does demonstrate is that these companies are committed and they want to do better. When a company puts their commitment out there, that speaks loud and clear to people with disabilities that these are companies that want to recruit, want to hire, want to retain, want to advance employees with disabilities. We're getting ready to celebrate the 25th anniversary of the Americans with Disabilities Act, and my organization has launched a disability rights mobile museum that's traveling the nation. In fact, we were at the Pittsburgh Pirates field yesterday. We're going to be at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce on Friday, July 31st. We did this because business wants to work together. We want to raise awareness and leverage the untapped potential of Americans with disabilities. We applaud your leadership, and we will look forward to working together.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Kriegel? Great.
Chairman Ryan, Ranking Member Levin, and members of the committee, my name is John Kriegel, and I'm Principal Investigator of the Work Incentive Planning and Assistance National Training Center at Virginia Commonwealth University. Thank you for this opportunity to discuss ways in which the Social Security Disability Benefits Program can work better to assist DI beneficiaries to obtain and maintain employment, improve their financial independence, and decrease their reliance on federal benefits. My testimony will address 4 major points. First, SSDI beneficiaries make employment decisions based on their personal financial situation, health, and other personal factors. 70% of the beneficiaries are over the age of 50. Many report their health to be poor or very poor. An estimated 28% live in poverty. Most have not worked for a long time. Yet many SSDI beneficiaries have long-term employment goals and have recently taken the steps to reach those goals. Based on analyses of the National Beneficiary Survey that identified work-oriented individuals, it's estimated that 1.5 million DI beneficiaries have work goals or aspirations, and an additional 1.4 million beneficiaries have the same ambitions and have taken steps toward achieving their goals in the past 12 months. We should focus our efforts on helping these beneficiaries overcome the obstacles that currently make it difficult for them to pursue their employment goals. Second, we must keep in mind that virtually all DI beneficiaries are dealing with a major disruption in their lives, a severe injury, debilitating illness, or a progressive condition. They face many challenges when attempting to return to work and need time to adjust to a new career. Extensive research over the past 2 decades has documented that beneficiaries repeatedly identify very specific barriers to employment that they feel that restrict their ability to pursue their vocational goals. Foremost among these barriers are fear of losing benefits, fear of overpayments, and lack of confidence in SSA's ability to accurately administer their DI payments. As a result, DI beneficiaries who are capable and desire employment are far too often choosing not to work, restricting their earnings so as not to jeopardize their entire DI payment, or leaving employment in the face of disruptive overpayments or benefit termination, all related to the all-or-nothing rules of the DI program. Third, working DI beneficiaries must comply with rules that are complex, difficult to understand, time-consuming, and too often result in unnecessary overpayments and unexpected benefit suspension. In my written testimony, I included the chart referred to by Congressman Ryan in his opening remarks. The chart provides a very complete, accurate description of the DI return to work path. It is important to note that each of the steps require significant processing by SSA and may result in sometimes lengthy delays and require time-consuming actions on the part of the beneficiary. For example, beneficiaries are required to continuously report earnings, including actually mailing paper copies of pay stubs and submitting other records manually to SSA. Also, SSA processing of substantial gainful activity determinations or work incentives may sometimes take several months, leaving beneficiaries uncertain as to their future income or potential overpayment. The current DI return to work process is not sufficiently automated and often results in confusion and uncertainty on the part of the beneficiary. Fourth, Future improvements to the DI program rules should eliminate the all-or-nothing aspect of a beneficiary's decision to return to work. Under current program rules, each beneficiary must decide if the personal and financial benefits of working will outweigh the potential risk of abrupt benefit suspension. Extensive research has been done to understand how individuals make financial decisions by examining the risks and rewards of their potential actions. We know that individuals who are not in good health, who are not employed, or who have fewer resources may be more risk-averse than other individuals when making employment decisions. Research also shows that a person is more likely to choose what is certain or established over what is possible, even if the possible event would be a much better circumstance. Unfortunately, the perceived high-risk nature of their employment decision too often leads beneficiaries unnecessarily restricting their earnings below the SG level, referred to as parking under the cash cliff. SSDI beneficiaries would benefit from a change in the DI program rules that would provide a gradual reduction in benefit payments as the individual advances in their career and avoids the abrupt total loss of payments after completion of the trial work period. This change would allow beneficiaries to pursue their employment goals while moderating the high-risk choices that are inherent in the current program rules. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Vandewater.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Congressman Levin, and members of the committee. I appreciate the invitation to appear before you this morning. Promoting opportunity for Social Security disability insurance beneficiaries, especially those trying to return to work, is an appropriately lofty goal. Policymakers should continually seek new and better ways of helping people with serious impairments return to the workforce. But expectations should be realistic and grounded in experience. Disability insurance already provides many inducements for beneficiaries to work. Most important, beneficiaries can earn up to $1,090 a month, called Substantial Gainful Activity, or SGA, indefinitely and still collect benefits. For an average beneficiary, this would nearly double his or her income. Beneficiaries are also eligible for employment services and supports to help them return to work. DI's eligibility criteria are very stringent, however, and research consistently finds that most beneficiaries have limited work capacity. Only a minority ever work again, and just 4% are able to earn enough to work their way off the DI rolls. Social Security has undertaken many demonstration projects over the years to test new ways to encourage beneficiaries to return to work, but they have consistently shown limited results or proved not to be cost-effective. Further efforts to promote work are therefore likely to have only a small payoff. In fact, some options could increase DI costs, harm vulnerable beneficiaries, increase payment errors, or even discourage work rather than encourage it. One approach would eliminate DI's cash cliff, which several of the other witnesses have discussed this morning. Instead, this proposal would reduce benefits gradually by $1 for each $2 once earnings exceed a certain level. Applying this benefit offset, starting at the $1,090 SGA level, would indeed create an incentive for beneficiaries to earn more than that amount, but would also raise program costs. Starting the offset at a lower earnings level would reduce costs, but it would also create a work disincentive for beneficiaries with monthly earnings between the proposed threshold and $1,090. These beneficiaries would face an extra 50% tax rate on their earnings in that range, thereby reducing their income and making work less attractive. For example, consider a typical DI beneficiary with a benefit of $1,200 a month. If he earns $800, his total monthly income would be $2,000 under the current rules. But if Congress passed a benefit offset that started at $300 in earnings, his benefit would drop by $250, 50% of his earnings above the threshold amount, and he'd lose 1/8 of his income. As a result, it's uncertain whether proposals such as a benefit offset would increase or decrease work overall. In addition, a benefit offset with a threshold below the current SGA level would shift income from poorer, sicker beneficiaries to those with higher earnings. In view of these concerns, any benefit offset proposal should be thoroughly tested and evaluated before it is implemented. It's worth testing some promising changes to DI through carefully structured demonstration projects, but those demonstrations won't yield quick answers. Congress should also consider other ways of rewarding work for people with impairments. Extending provisions of the Earned Income Tax Credit and Child Tax Credit that are now slated to expire after 2017, and improving the EITC for childless workers, a proposal that is backed by both Chairman Ryan and President Obama, would boost the rewards from work for many low-wage workers with disabilities. First and foremost, however, Congress should take steps to assure sufficient financing for disability insurance and thereby avert a 20% cut in benefits. But Congress should not expect to find a magic bullet that will simultaneously trim costs, make beneficiaries better off, and avert the need to replenish the DI Trust Fund in 2016 and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd like to ask each of you a lot of questions, but I want to be mindful of everybody's time here. First, like the retirement law, once the trust fund is exhausted, then the across-the-board cut comes. That comes, in this case, next year. And so we have to prevent that from happening, and that is our goal, is to prevent that from happening. That's point number one. Point number two, there's a lot of experience right here that we want to gain some insight from. So, Mr. Zelli? Yeah. Let me ask you, you went into this in your testimony, but go a little deeper if you could about the cliff. How, in your view, from just seeing it in people's lives, does the cliff affect a person's ability and willingness to work? What fear is associated with this? Do people plan and organize their lives around this cliff? Give me a sense of what this is like, what people are experiencing right now.
Well, I agree that the testimony you heard about, people want certainty in their lives, and the system we have is so complex, it gets in the way. The fear comes in two ways. Fear comes from people with disabilities having gone through a traumatic experience, and also fear on businesses' side in terms of, I'm going to say the wrong thing or my health care costs are going to go up. I'll never be able to fire them because of this ADA thing, all of which are not true. You'll hear businesses testify just the opposite of that. The fear comes as I'm certain that I'm going to get $1,000 a month, and if I get $1 more, I will lose everything. I faced that, but the reason it wasn't a problem for me at the time is that I had a company who wanted to hire me back. I was fortunate that I wasn't a plumber or electrician. I had a skill that was valued, and I could return to that job, and the company wanted me back. So I was able to return, hit the floor running, and then the $800 a month went away. It would have been nice because that helped with my disability-related expenses. But again, Chairman, you're asking about the fear, and the fear is the cliff more than anything. It's not a fear of going back to work. We all want the dignity of work. We all want the value of what's the second question people?
Well, we see the statistics, we see the economics, we see the tax rates and things like this, but we want to get a sense of what a person is experiencing as they try to get themselves back to where they were in life or where they want to get to. And that's the cliff fear is what I'm trying to get a sense of, and I think that's pretty helpful. Since you talked about the complexity of it, let me just go to one person over. Mr. Smith, you ran the demonstration project in Vermont.
Yes.
And the results from what your testimony says, a 25% increase in the number of beneficiaries who worked above the SGA amount, correct?
Yeah, that was for all 4 states.
Yeah, that's right, for all 4 states, including Wisconsin. Walk me through your belief, your impression on whether we can scale this up nationwide. Do you think Social Security can administer a benefit offset approach? That's question number 1. Meaning, can we scale this up? Because the purpose of a demonstration project is to see if an idea works, and then if it does, scale it up for the rest of the country. That's the whole purpose of it. So can we do that? Number 2, your recommendation, and some others have been recommending this, why do you recommend starting a benefit offset at an amount lower than was tested at the 4-state pilot? Other groups also recommend starting the benefit offset below the SGA level. Tell us why you propose doing it that way. So can we scale it up, and give us the rationale for your recommendation?
Sure. Yeah, I believe that the Social Security Administration can certainly implement benefit offset. They already do so for the SSI
right.
program. And if you get rid of the complexity of the trial work period, the extended period of eligibility that's built into the SSDI program, and have a simple offset, it will be simpler to administer for Social Security. And Social Security has made that proposal under what they call the Work Incentives Simplification Project. So yes, I believe Social Security could administer an offset. The second question, the reason why I and others have proposed an offset starting at less than SGA is that we recognize that if the offset started at SGA, that it would indeed increase cost to the program. And so it's in a sense a real, that it's a balance from my perspective, in that we see the from our experience, we see the offset, the cash cliff, and the fear of going off the program completely and going into an overpayment as a far more powerful disincentive to work than a more graduated approach, a more predictable approach that folks can rely on. That's why, in addition to that, that's why I think continued attachment to the program, allowing folks to continued attachment to the program, no matter how much they work, would be a key balance to that.
Meaning, if you have a good month and a bad month, you can go back.
Right. And so my staff, who work with thousands of beneficiaries, could say to someone, look, no matter what happens, the more you work, the better you're going to be off. And that would be wonderful.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense, because I mean, we have two issues here. We've got a fiscal problem. We've got bankruptcy coming, insolvency, and we've got a messed up work disincentive. And so we've got to try and find a way of harmonizing those two objectives and fixing both those problems. I could go on and on. I don't want to, because I want to recognize we have a lot of members who want to ask questions, so I'd like to recognize Mr. Levin.
Thank you. As you said, Mr. Chairman, there's agreement we have to avoid the 20% cut. Also, we want to reduce complexity, but I want to get, if I might, to the nub of this. All of us want very much that those who are disabled and who are able to work and want to should be able to do so. There's much talk about the cliff, but the challenge is this. If you adopt the position of revenue neutrality, the danger is you're going to end the cliff by deepening the hole for those who are making much less as they work. So, Mr. Vanderwater, your testimony talks to us about this. So talk to us about how much most of the people who are disabled who are now working, how much they earn, and what the consequences might be if you set a level in terms of this new proposal. What happens to many people disabled who have returned to work?
Mr. Levin, the data that we have indicate quite clearly that of the beneficiaries who work, most of them are earning amounts that are substantially below the so-called substantial gainful activity level that I and the other witnesses have been talking about. That is, there are very few beneficiaries who are earning near this $1,090 a month cutoff. Now, the implication of that is that while if you were to start a benefit off, the lower the threshold at which you started the benefit offset, the more people would be potentially disadvantaged. That is, if you started, I've seen estimates that suggest, for example, if we wanted to have a benefit offset that was truly cost neutral, it would have to start at around $300 a month. So that would mean that for someone who was earning $500 a month, which would be more typical than someone earning, say, $1,000, that person would face losing part of his benefit. So in that case, instituting a benefit offset would actually be a work disincentive for that person rather than an incentive. So that in order to figure out whether the program as a whole, that the proposal as a whole was a work incentive, you'd be balancing the benefits for some and the disadvantages for others.
Let me ask, who disagrees with that? Indeed, I think it's very clear, Mr. Smith, that CBO estimates that changing it the way it was done in the states that you discussed would increase the overall cost for SSDI. I mean, we face a real challenge here and a real dilemma. You go to an offset and you're focusing on those who are making more than 1090, and you're going to essentially, if you have revenue neutrality, reduce the amount that's being received by those who are disabled, which they're earning $300-400. They're not rich. And you end the cliff for those who are making more than 1,090 if you have a 1-2 proposal. So everybody who's proposing that has to face up to this issue. And that's why the chairman and I and Mr. Becerra and our good friend from Texas have said we need to look at the facts. Those who are disabled, who are able to return to work, should have an incentive to do that, not a disincentive. And to also make sure that the system gives them a decent standard of living. So anybody who says, let's have an offset, it has to be absolutely revenue neutral, is essentially, I think, having to deal with consequences for the individual lives of, I think numerically, we don't know exactly how many, the vast majority of people who are returning to work are earning much less than 1,090. I mean, Mr. Smith, that's true, isn't it?
Yes, that is true. Based on our experience in my state, we serve currently about 10% of the SSDI beneficiaries in the state. And my staff, I looked at it yesterday, over the last decade have worked with about 10,000 10,000 beneficiaries, about half of whom were SSDI beneficiaries. And what we see clearly is that people are, if you look at this like an economist, and you're assuming that people are doing the math and they understand exactly where the cliff is. The reality is what we see is that folks are fearful, and so they actually suppress their earnings well below the SGA level because they've heard a story from a friend or a neighbor who was suddenly cut off the program and suddenly got a letter saying they had a $10,000 overpayment because of the all-or-nothing nature of the DI program. And that's the other issue I think it's critical to understand, is that the all-or-nothing nature of the SSDI program creates large overpayments because if you get it wrong, and it's very easy to get it wrong, It takes months for my staff to learn the SSDI
Okay,
rules.
So I
You
think
end up
we
with-
need a system so that overpayments are corrected more quickly. And many of us have been asking for more funding to carry out the program. And often, for years, that's been resisted. And there's underfunding, I think, of the personnel of the department. We have to adjust that, but we need to look at this not only as economists, but as the people who are disabled, in most cases severely disabled, and where there's a desire to return to work. Make sure that as we worry about those who would be affected by the cliff, look at those who are not earning anywhere near where they would reach the cliff. And so you have to make sure when you're talking about offsetting that you're not essentially setting off some consequences for a lot of people who have returned to work who can't make anything close to $1,000 and who under a proposal would have their monthly benefit reduced. You bet.
I think this is a great conversation. We want to continue. I want to turn it to Mr. Johnson. But I think that what we're trying to get at here is the existence of the cliff. What does it do to the psychology of the person? And it's not something that we can look antiseptically as a statistical problem like an economist, but what does it do to the nature of a person and their decision making? And that's what we're trying to get a hand on here. Mr. Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate you holding the hearing on promoting opportunity for those with disability. And Mr. Chairman, I would say that we have a moral responsibility to help those with disabilities who can get back to work. And you know, according to a recent survey, 40% of the beneficiaries said they were interested in working, yet in 2013, only 1/2 of 1% left the rolls. Bottom line, we can and must do better. Ms. Houghton, welcome. Good to see you again. As you may know, a few years ago, I had the pleasure of touring the Walgreens distribution center in Waxahachie near my district. And there, with the help of the Texas Department of Assistive and Rehabilitation Services, those with disabilities, including former disability beneficiaries, worked side by side with other workers doing the same job for the same pay with the same performance. What I saw there was impressive and spoke to the fact that a business can know the value of individuals with disabilities and wants to make these folks be part of the team. Ms. Houghton, let me ask you really, does your organization help companies who want to employ individuals with disability?
Nice to see you, Congressman, and absolutely the answer is yes. We're at a tipping point. Business is countless companies, large, medium, small, in all different sectors, are joining our organization, and the way that we help business is twofold. Most importantly, we connect them with each other. There's a lot that they can learn from Walgreens, from Procter & Gamble, from Microsoft, from IBM. They can teach each other best practices. And we become a bridge to the myriad of resources that are out there through strategic alliances that we have with different nonprofits.
Well, I appreciate you seeking help from the business community overall. Is Walgreens a rare exception, or is someone else in the area doing the same thing?
They used to be a rare exception, but not anymore. There are numerous, I repeat, numerous companies that see value, that see that disability is helping them drive their financial performance and innovate and develop new products and services.
Thank you. Dr. Kriegel, while we will talk a lot today about how to help disability beneficiaries return to work, I'm also concerned about those individuals that apply for benefits, are denied, and then try to return to work. At a local hearing office, it takes 435 days on the average for someone to receive a decision by a judge. That's well over a year waiting on a decision and valuable time spent out of the workforce. As you may know, I've got a bill to require Social Security to provide denied applicants with information on organizations that do provide employment support. What are your thoughts on that?
Mike?
We think that that'd be a very helpful a benefit to people who apply but do not get awarded benefits. Remember, well over half of the individuals who apply for Social Security do not get accepted at the disability determination level. The longer that they are out of engagement with the workforce, the longer they go unemployed, the more challenging it will be for them to return to work. As soon as they can receive help, that will give them the assistance that they really need in order to do this. So we'd be very supportive of sending information to employment service providers and other organizations who could help those folks.
Yeah, unfortunately, it seems to me that it's just too complicated for folks right now to do something about it. Some are able to work with benefit counselors, but what about those who aren't working with a benefit counselor? Would a website, as outlined in my promoting opportunity through informed choice bill, help at all?
Yeah, I think that all additional information, accurate, complete information that can be provided to beneficiaries, help them make the choices that they need to make. A lot of them, when they first are awarded benefits, they get a brochure about what will happen if you return to work. But they may go a lengthy period of time. They may be still dealing with their illness or their condition. When they think about working, it's hard to locate that brochure and move forward. There are resources available in the community that can help them do that. But just as significantly, if they can search the web, if they can identify resources, all those tools are very, very valuable. They need to be specific to individual states because the healthcare programs in states may vary considerably, but all tools would be useful to the beneficiaries.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Engel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and let me really thank this panel. It's been a political process that the majority picks most all of the members of the panel, and then the minority selects one member. But the credibility and experience that all of you have, it's hard for me to see any sense of partisanship or politics in your goals or the testimony in which you've given. And I certainly hope that it would be possible to take advantage of this opportunity for you to see the issues that we are wrestling with and know that we recognize that you deal with these issues far more than we do on an everyday and sometimes lifetime career, and try to get together and help us with recommendations as to what we should be doing. And I hear Chairman Johnson talk about our moral responsibility, and I'm certain that other people on his side of the aisle will be talking about the federal government's obligation to do something for people who work hard every day and through no fault of their own need a little help. I want to take advantage of this movement because there are just some people in this Congress that if the President of the United States says he wants it, they're going to be against it. There are other people who believe that the United States government has no responsibility to our citizens in education or in health, but that should be a local issue. I think this hearing gives us an opportunity to see what can we agree on and how we can use this to bring us together so the American people might have reason to believe that when there's a crisis that's going to affect millions of people, the Congress and especially this historic committee can come together and deal with it. So I hope you would consider outside of this hearing room getting together and giving to all of us the recommendations you have, especially to the political challenging questions that we'll be facing. In addition to that, I have been annoyed with my profession of lawyers as I see their appeal on television. Do you believe you're entitled to disability benefits? If you're working and still think you're entitled, come and see us. We have doctors, we can examine you, there's no charge, there's no payment. You don't owe us anything if we get you on Social Security. So get on with your life and let us get you Social Security benefits. I know all of you have heard about these. Do you have anything positive or negative to say about these advertisers that encourages people to get on disability benefits, Mr. Zeller?
I'm not a lawyer, and I don't want to disparage
If you
lawyers.
don't want to wrestle with the question, please don't take time of the 5 minutes. To me, it's clear cut. They do it for accidents. They do it for everything. They do it for 1/3 of the commission of any awards. And I know it's immoral, and I know it's probably legal. Now, if you don't want to say anything one way or the other, I can go to the bar and get attitudes. But you are professional, and they either help or hurt. How about you, Mr. Vanderwater?
Well, I do, Congressman, believe that this is something you're paying for, right? You are paying, and when you're working for this benefit.
I'm
So-
trying to really
understand.
zero my question in on just one issue. And I'm not going to repeat it because I don't have the time. So why don't we pass? I apologize for being short. Mr. Smith, you have any views on this?
This is not an area that I'm
Okay,
an expert
Ms.
in,
Horton.
but we.
Has anyone any views on the encouragement of people to get on Social Security disability, and they come into the law firm, and they will provide you with the necessary documents, and they get paid for doing if they're successful. If you don't, then just say that. If anyone has any views, I'd appreciate it this time.
Congressman Rangel?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir. I think that the Social Security Disability Determination Office does a very good, very accurate job
Of doing what?
of determining who is eligible for benefits and who isn't.
But
It
I
goes
was
to the
talking
level.
about paid advertisement on TV.
Yes, it goes to the level then of an administrative law judge, and that's where the lawyers get involved, and that's where a decision, do you meet the eligibility criteria in
This is the
Florida?
problem that some of us had in Congress and not rocking the boat. And I'm surprised that this panel is affected the same way by powerful people that decide policy on health care as well as disability. Thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Brady, you recognize.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of common ground in this hearing today. Both parties, I believe, want to help those who are truly disabled. We want to eliminate fraud in the system. There's too much, and it robs from those who are truly disabled. And then we want to encourage those who want to go back to work to go back to work. The good news is our economy's changed. Fewer people are digging ditches. Other skills are needed in the workforce. The workforce has never been more accommodative, both from the new technologies that are remarkable, plus the changes businesses have made to encourage workers who are disabled to get back to work. So what a perfect time to look at 21st century fresh eyes on the disability program. Mr. Smith, while disability and the supplemental security income programs share many things, they're often very different in how they treat earnings. You gave a hypothetical example. I just want to sort of highlight that again. Let's say Dan Disability gets $1,100 a month. That's about average. Sally Supplemental, and believe me, I already regret using those names, but we're going to stick with them. Sally Supplemental gets about $700 a month. Again, right where the average is. So if they both get jobs of $1,200 a month, roughly minimum wage, but above the substantial gainful activity, so it's triggered. In this example, Dan Disability loses his entire disability benefit. So he goes from $1,100 to $1,200 a month, loses all of that. Sally Supplemental, though, because there's a glide path, gets $650 a month. So she's nearly a $1,000 gain for going back to that first economic rung on the ladder back to work. So $100 to get off disability and go back to work, nearly a $1,000 gain to do the exact same thing, two people who sincerely want to get back into the workforce. In your experience, have you worked with individuals and disabilities who have faced that exact choice when they want to return to work?
Yes, all the time. It's made sometimes more complicated because there's, I forget the exact number, there's about 20%, 25% of beneficiaries receive both benefits at the same time. And so they have one work incentive for the SSI program and offset, and then the cash cliff built into the DI program. But until I heard your question, I'd never really thought about the disparity in the example that you give. But yes, indeed, the person on SSI would be financially better off taking the same job than the person on SSDI who would lose their entire check. So the person on SSI's net income would be greater in that example, which doesn't seem equitable to me.
And I use that example because I think those who are on disability who want to go back, the biggest decision they make is for that first job back, because they have to weigh what are the pros and cons of doing it. Once they get back on that first economic ladder, they start building from there. And the way I see it, there is a huge incentive or disincentive for those on disability to make that first leap back into the workforce, even at roughly a minimum wage job, because that cash cliff is you just cut it off behind them, and it seems to me the proposals we've heard today about eliminating the cash cliff, giving people incentives to go back to work, sort of have that safety net under them so they're actually, encouraged to go back to work and to earn more money, stay in the workforce to continue to grow. It seems to me to be sort of the 21st century thinking that we need to bring back to disability. And so, Ms. Houghton, from your standpoint, does that make sense that eliminating that cash cliff would encourage that first job back? And I'm almost out of time.
Yeah, we're certainly not experts, but it absolutely makes sense.
Right. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. McDermott, do you care to question?
Yes. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would take this hearing more seriously if on the 7th of January 2015 the House had not passed a set of rules that set in place a 20% cut on these SSDI folks. The Washington Post reported in their title is Social Security disability payments will be cut by a fifth if the Congress does not act. So they've set in place the cut already. They've said you can't shift money from old age assistance to the SSDI program. So we're stuck. We have to act in this committee. Now, we can't pass a transportation bill. We can't hardly pass an ESEA bill yesterday. We can't pass anything around here. And to think this is going to get through by 2016 is really believing in the tooth fairy, because you're talking about passing through two houses of Congress, conference committee, and everything, and we have to cut people off the program to have enough money to keep the benefit plan up. Now, Dr. Vandervetter, you're PhD in economics and all of that. Tell me how many people will have to be cut off of disability benefits in order to have enough money that we can have the same benefit level for the ones who stay on?
Well, the short answer is that it's not possible in any reasonable way to assure sufficient financing for the Disability Insurance Trust Fund simply by cutting people off the rolls. Instead of cutting the average benefit by 20%, you could theoretically somehow remove 20% of the people from the benefit rolls. But as I say, there's no practical way to do that between now and the end of next year, nor I'm sure would anyone on this committee, Republican or Democrat, have any interest in doing that.
So there is going to be a cut in benefits because practically it's not possible to do what rule, it's Q in the rules in case anybody wants to look. It's a Social Security solvency rule that we passed that says you can't shift money. So we're stuck with this problem, right?
Well, the rule doesn't say that you have to achieve balanced solely by cutting benefits, but it does say you have to include some overall savings as part of a package.
Somebody who's on Social Security, I agree there are problems in this program. I could give anecdotes of people who wanted to go back to work. None of the testimony I've heard up here is unusual, because the AIDS epidemic is a perfect example where people had a death sentence. They got on SSDI, then came ARTs, and they're treated, and they could go back to work, but they would lose their health care. And if they had a relapse in their disease, they then would have a big problem getting back onto Medicare SSDI. So they didn't want to leave. So I know there are problems. But the question is, how many people do you think really can be taken off the rolls in order to get the savings necessary? I mean, we're doing 4% now come off. That's about 360,000 people out of 9 million. How many more people have to be somehow bumped off by these new rules that we're going to put together here in the committee in the next 18 months?
Well, I think the likelihood of encouraging large numbers of people to leave the benefit rolls is fairly small. Mr. Smith discussed the experience with this benefit offset pilot demonstration. He talked about a 25% increase in people earning more than substantial gainful activity. That's great, but that's 25% of a fairly small number. And that demonstration project as a whole, again, as Mr. Smith indicated, showed that adding a benefit offset starting at the 1,090 SGA threshold would add to program costs.
If somebody's on Social Security disability, they have the $1,000 that they've, the 1,090 that they've earned, plus their benefit, what's their average benefit from SSDI?
The average benefit is a bit under $1,200 a month.
A bit under?
$1,200. It's $1,165.
That's $2,200 a month
precisely.
to live on. What's the poverty level for a person of?
It's roughly at the poverty level. I don't remember the exact
So
number.
we're talking about people at the poverty level.
Well, if that were their only source of income. Now, for single individuals, it is often the only source of income. For married beneficiaries, they may also have spousal earnings.
And that's not counted against their income.
No, DI is not income tested.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Thank you. Mr. T-Berry.
Great testimony from all of the witnesses. Thank you so much. First slide, please. Kind of to pick up on Mr. Brady's point, Dan DI here, the cliff that has been talked about that some of you actually have in your testimony, pretty darn clear at 1,090. Second chart, please. Ssdi, SSI, the offset approach. Next slide, please. Oh, there you go. The offset approach with Ssdi, SSI. Just one word answer, yes or no, starting to my left. Do you support us going to some sort of offset system for DI?
I'm going
Yes
to say,
or
I'm
no?
going to say yes, if that's what I'm limited to. Lots of ways to skin a cat.
Yeah, agreed. Agreed.
You could raise. the
I understand
SGA.
that. Just yet, that's an offset system. I'm not saying what type of offset system. Next.
Yes, I would support an offset.
Thank you.
Yes, it appears that people would be better off.
Thank you.
Yes, Congressman?
It would depend upon the details of the proposal.
So we all know, and you all know, that Social Security runs these systems. And the two programs share many things, but their work rules are obviously different, even aside from this approach to what happens to the beneficiary when they work. Aside from the offset in the SSI program, how earnings are counted, as you know, is very different as well. Dr. Kriegel? In the DI program, earnings are counted when they are earned. In the SSI program, they're counted when they are received. Can you tell us, from your experience, do beneficiaries know the difference, and what is the difference?
Yeah, this is adds tremendous complexity, unnecessary complexity to the calculations that individuals make and the administrative work that Social Security has to do. So in the SSI program, as you mentioned, it's when you are paid. So it's easy to do documentation if you have to do things related to earnings or impairment-related work expenses or that type of thing. SSDI counts it in terms of when you did the work. And so there may be people who are paid throughout the year but only work 10 months out of that year.
So that change, if we change the DI work rules and earnings requirements to the SSI ones, that would be a simplification that would be helpful?
That would greatly reduce the administrative burden, and it would definitely help concurrent beneficiaries, people both on SSI and SSDI, not to have to follow two sets of rules when they communicate with Social Security.
Ms. Houghton, can you comment on that from your experience?
That seems to make sense.
Oh, very good. Mr. Smith?
Yeah, I agree with Dr. Kriegel.
Mr. Zell?
Yes.
Sir?
I think that simplifying the work rules would in general be a good thing, yes.
Wow, we are fine in agreement here, except for the tooth fairy. I hope my daughters aren't watching. They'd be very disappointed. So in just another way that the DI program is complicated, Mr. Smith, you talked in your testimony about the disincentive for the beneficiary. Can you expand upon that in terms of the comparison between the two programs?
Sure. So from our experience, from the beneficiary's perspective, the SSI program is far more simple to explain in terms of, you have, if you earn above this level, your benefit will be adjusted $1 for $2. The SSDI program has a trial work period that can be non-consecutive. It has a grace period. It has an extended period of eligibility.
So all those things, the point that I think you made is all those things actually put fear into the beneficiary to fall well short of what they could actually earn. Yeah. And so going to some sort of benefit offset as well as simplifying those rules will give beneficiaries less stress. Is that what you are trying to tell us?
Yes, yeah, that my staff would be able to tell beneficiaries, and that would be able to. It would be simple enough that most beneficiaries would be able to understand, and it would be much easier for the folks that support those beneficiaries to understand. Currently, the DI rules are terribly complex. I have to send my staff to training with Dr. Kraigel's staff to understand the rules.
Thank you. Very well.
The gentleman has expired. Mr. Lewis, you're recognized.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me thank each of the witnesses for being here today. Dr. Paul Vanderwaal, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for all of your learning. You know a great deal about this issue. Some of the witnesses have suggested that disabled workers receiving Social Security choose not to return to work. They suggested that these workers may intentionally lower their earning so they won't lose Social Security benefits. I want you to tell members of the committee, does the data support that theory?
Mr. Lewis, that's an excellent question. There have been, a lot of studies over the years about precisely this issue, and I think the general conclusion is that while there are certainly some beneficiaries for whom that's true, as I said in answer to a previous question, the fraction seems to be pretty small. In particular, some writers talk about something which in the jargon is known as parking, that is whether beneficiaries earn just below the $1,090 a month level to avoid triggering loss of benefits. And the various studies have suggested the number of beneficiaries who engage in that sort of behavior is on the order of a few tenths of a percent. That is, so that it is a phenomenon, but it's not a very large one.
Let me ask you, why is it so difficult for individuals receiving disability Social Security benefits to return to work?
The reason, as I and the other witnesses have indicated, is that beneficiaries have very severe impairments. They tend to be older. Dr. Kriegel mentioned that 70% are age 50 or above. They tend to have very limited education, in many cases not having completed high school. And all of these factors create great impediments to their ability to return to work.
Is there some correlation between people who go out and do the hard, back-breaking work and others who sort of desk work, people who work on the farms and the mills?
Oh, absolutely. The likelihood of a person who, with a college education, receiving disability insurance is much, much less than for someone who has only a high school education. And in turn, that person's likelihood of receiving disability insurance is much, much less than for a person who's never completed high school. So there's a very close relationship between receipt of disability insurance and the person's education and training.
Well, thank you very much. Mr. Chairman, you're back.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Mr. Eckert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the witnesses for your testimony and taking time from your busy schedule to be here. I really liked the analogy used by Mr. Smith, the spider web versus the trampoline. I think that clearly illustrates a picture that everybody can attach themselves to and understand. I want to see if I can continue on with Mr. T-Berry's successful efforts in getting agreement. So the chairman mentioned early in his comments that we don't want a 20% cut. We want the system to pay on time. We want the program to work better, and we want to help people get back to work. We want to strengthen the disability insurance program to protect those beneficiaries. Everyone agree with that, with those premises?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. Okay, good. We're still on the positive side then. So I want to ask Dr. Kriegel a question that relates to one of those anecdotal stories. There's a disabled veteran in my district who has shared with us that because of the complexities and confusing rules of SSDI work incentive programs, he went back to work, was hit with overpayments, and now he's struggling to pay those overpayments back. And he also understands and recognizes that he actually would have been better off, he would have had more money if he had simply remained on disability and not gotten a part-time job. So we know the Social Security Subcommittee has recently had a hearing on overpayments. How common is it to receive an overpayment, and what causes overpayments? Mr. Kriegel.
Congressman Reichert, it's very common for individuals to receive overpayments. If you look at the percentage of overpayments, SSA says that they make 99% of their payments on time and accurately, but there's only 1% that don't. Well, 10% of the people on DI work, and so if it's 10%, then it's 10% of people who are on DI who may have an overpayment at some point in time. What happens then is it relates to another huge administrative issue, and that relates to reporting earnings. The beneficiary has to report earnings to Social Security. If they do that accurately, and if Social Security immediately logs it in, then they should not result in an overpayment. However, it may take weeks or more for it to be logged in, and it may be logged in inaccurately, or the individual may not understand the rules. And so they don't report the overpayments, and that's when you get overpayments of $40,000, $60,000, $70,000 that you may hear of. There are also overpayments in the SSDI system that has the gradual ramp off as individuals' work progresses, but these are smaller overpayments and that may be affected in 1 month and then recovered in the next month, and you don't have these traumatic tens of thousands of dollars of overpayments that some individuals receive.
And just out of curiosity, why does it take weeks to log in this information?
So, I'm sorry?
Why does it take weeks? You said it sometimes takes weeks to log in the information provided.
This has to do with the workload within the local offices, the priority that's given to this particular work. Remember, they're dealing with a paper process. The benefit to log it, you mail in your actual pay stubs or copies of your pay stubs, and somebody manually logs that in. We're not using automation in the process that could be done that would really reduce the administrative burden and make these payments more accurate.
All right. I have one other question. My father's on disability. I'm the oldest of 7 children, Mrs. Ellie, so I can identify with this in a different way. My father was injured at work, and so I worry about the kids. So the recipient loses his or her benefits, the injured parent. What about the kids' benefits? They also get benefits. Mr. Kriegel, what happens to those benefits?
Yes, if your benefits go into suspension because you have completed the trial work period and you go over substantial gainful activity, your benefit is suspended, and then the children's benefits are immediately suspended as well. This is a very, very important issue that needs to be taken into account.
I'm sure it affects the person's decision as to whether or not go back to work or not go back to work, right?
Very important. That's very true.
And my time has expired. I was going to go to Mr. Zelli, but Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Neal, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank the panelists. This has been very helpful as we try to sort data and try to get information from those who are experts in the field. And I appreciate the conciliatory tone of the members of the committee today as we try to probe the issue. Would you agree that there has been an uptick, or some would argue a surge in disability applications during the recession? You could just shake your heads, because I'll pursue the questioning after that.
Yes, there is generally an uptick in applications during recessions, but the rate of awards goes down, so that the number of beneficiaries goes up only slightly during poor economic times.
The others agree that there was an uptick during the midst of the recession, and some of this is linked to the worker participation rate. Some would ascribe the problem to being, but it's hard after Mr. Zelli testified that he had gone from gainful employment to a benefit of $9,600 a year. I don't think there was an incentive for him to say, I'd like the $9,600 as opposed to what had been a pretty good career. And I think in part of the atmosphere that we've been discussing this in, there's been the suggestion in some quarters that there have been more disability income applications because of the fact that it's been harder to find work. Do any of you want to comment on that?
I would comment that I don't believe that's true. I believe that we are following the population increase of baby boomers. You just heard testimony that says the actual awards are less. So even if you're applying for it, so what? The actuality is that no. I mean, people of acquired disability are looking for ways to get back to work. And Social Security is one way to ramp. It can be one way to ramp back on. It's just too complicated. So I don't know if I answer your question.
Yeah, no, that's perfect, as a matter of fact, yes. And the other panelists would like to.
I just had one thing to add. I can't speak to the increase in the roles, but as working within vocational rehabilitation, we serve folks both who receive SSDI and SSI and folks who don't. And it's clear to me that there are folks who are not currently on SSI or SSDI.
Please speak up, please.
There are folks who are currently not on SSI or SSDI who would probably be eligible, but also given some early intervention and some employment supports may be able to delay or maybe never go onto the program if they're given the appropriate employment supports at that point.
Okay. Another, for the panelists, anybody who wants to offer an answer, if one gets back to the workforce and they give up their benefits, if the problem reoccurs, can they reclaim or can they go back to disability, Social Security disability?
I can state that actually happened to me.
Okay.
That I can testify that I was able to bounce, went from a job, off the job, SSDI came back right away with the health care insurance. Again, granted, it wasn't a lot of money in my case, but it did come back. So yes, that occurs, and that trial work period starts right again. You're bounced, you're back into it, and it's the same thing. I do want to comment that you have done this. You know, this 20% cut. Don't do that. You figured this out. I know it must be so complex, but you've done it on SSI. You've done it on early retirement. You guys can figure, men and women can figure this out. And because people are depending upon you to figure it out, just get out of the way and let us go back to work. I mean, that's really what we're trying to get across to you today, is that there are barriers in the system that prevent us who want to go to work going to work. And I see thousands of people with disabilities. That's who I'm speaking about. I'm not a math major. You've got very talented math folks, but it must be very frustrating when you got CBO that says you can't count tax income, you can't count new taxes, or you can't count the fact that you're going to be paying SSDI when you're receiving it. Makes no sense. So you have tough jobs. I admire you for what you're doing, but please figure this out.
I think the metaphor you used was the correct one in your testimony, Mr. Zelli, when you suggested the trampoline effect. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Bastani, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you all for your testimony. It's been very helpful. I chair the Human Resources Subcommittee of this committee, and we've been looking at work incentives across a number of programs and whether they're actually working or not. And it was kind of interesting. My colleague, Mr. T-Berry, just a moment ago, highlighted the more gradual cliff with the SSI program versus what we see with the DI program. And it seems to make a difference. I mean, some numbers I have, SSI recipients have work less experience than DI recipients, but an average of 5% leave SSI roles each year due to income from work or other sources, which is about 10 times higher than what we see with the DI recipients. But even then, 5% is still a pretty low rate. And as we look at work incentives, there are many, many different organizations across the spectrum that work in this space. And so, Dr. Kriegel, I want to ask you, do you think the current work incentives and policies designed to help these low-income individuals and individuals with disabilities, do they successfully promote work, and are we actually measuring outcomes with all this?
Yep. I think that Congressman, I think that the work incentives within the SSI program do help. Basically, these individuals, many of them have minimal employment histories in contrast to the DI population. And so starting a career, working for the first time, the offset that they receive helps them get comfortable with work, and they can move their way forward. But that's just part of the picture. There also needs parts of the service system that other witnesses have referred to, vocational rehabilitation and all of those kind of things, and employers that are involved in the process as well. So in combination with the work incentives, there needs to be support for those individuals to put them in contact with the employers who stand ready to do that. One of the primary agencies for that is vocational rehabilitation, who has the responsibility for doing that.
Is there more that we can do to help streamline this approach, make it more effective?
Within the SSI program, I think that there are a couple of things that could be done readily. The first one would be to try to do a better job of linking the SSI beneficiaries to employment. There's the Ticket to Work program, but there's also maybe other opportunities that you could look at so that people are aware of the services and the supports that are out there. And then looking at the other array of benefits that the SSI population may look at as well, because as they work, they have to worry about, are they jeopardizing their food stamps, their children's health programs, and those kinds of things. So it's also the interaction of benefits at the SSI level.
I appreciate that. And our subcommittee's been looking at some of these cross-jurisdictional programs to try to understand the interactions so that we can hopefully better design a program, programs that help people in need. But if you could step back for a minute and start from scratch, how would you design a system that actually provides employment assistance? I mean, if you could just kind of rewrite things from the beginning, how would you do that?
Right. Everybody needs to have access. Everybody has two reasons to go to work. One, they want to work. Work is meaningful in their lives. And then the second thing that hasn't been talked about is these people are in poverty.
Yeah.
And some of them are making choices between food and between medications really on a monthly basis. They're really living at a subsistence level. 70% of the SSI folks are working below the federal poverty level, have income below the federal poverty level. So those folks need the same kinds of supports that other individuals in poverty need in order to get that done. Childcare, they're more likely to have children. Transportation, they may have to do specialized transportation because of needs for certain kinds of support that they effectively need. So looking at those kinds of things that surround the individual, we hear stories weekly about people who were working, their truck broke down, they went to a payday loan person, they got their truck repaired, they can go back to work, they've been paying $50 a month on their $600 principal, and they still have a $600 principal. So it's all these things that surround the individual in addition to their own workability.
And ultimately, we do have to measure results, outcomes, what's really working and what isn't, as we, because as you look at all these different programs, we need to see which programs are really effective and are actually moving people onto the work roles versus those that aren't.
Yes.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Becerra, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you all for your testimony. And I think, actually, Mr. Ssdi, I think you're right. We can't come up with a solution. And I think especially for someone who, like you, figured out a way to get herself back into a position where you could be gainfully employed, I think that ultimately that's what we want to do. And when our previous leaders had the vision to come up with a program like Social Security, it was essentially for that, because most people want to pick themselves back up. And so I thank you for everything you're trying to do to help us get there. I just want to make sure I clarify a couple of things. Because we talk about this stuff because we know we talk SSDI, we talk the lingo all the time, but most Americans probably wonder what the heck we're talking about. SSDI is not SSI that some people hear about. SSI is a supplemental security income, which is an income for low-income Americans that you get not because you worked and paid into it, but because you're low income. SSDI, disability insurance, Social Security disability insurance, is not welfare. Welfare you get whether you worked or not, and it's because you're in a difficult circumstance. SSDI goes only to Americans who, as Mr. Ssdi pointed out in his testimony, you worked. Not only did you work, but you pay taxes into Social Security to be able to get those benefits. So every time you work and you see that paycheck, you see that deduction, it goes for Social Security. It's for your potential retirement or your potential, like Mr. Ssdi, to become disabled. Or, unfortunately for some, if they die, it's for your survivors. That's the purpose of Social Security, that three-pronged system, right? And folks should be very clear. We're not talking about some welfare program. No, you paid into it, right? At the same time, I think we have to be clear. All of us as Americans who've been paying into the Social Security system have provided the system more money than it needs right now to pay out all benefits, to the tune of close to $3 trillion, which we right now in the trust fund. And that's to help Americans, whether they're getting ready to retire or by some misfortune become disabled, they can get those benefits. This so-called 20% cut, it's not a cut that's required in law or a fait accompli. It's only because 20 years ago when the formula was created by Congress on how to distribute the Social Security dollars that we contribute through our taxes into the pots of money for retirement, disability, or for our survivors was off. 20 years ago, would we have known exactly? Actually, they actually knew that they were only providing about 20 years worth of funding for DI out of the pot of money that Americans are contributing. But that doesn't mean that we should cut disability insurance for Mr. Ssdi or folks who had disability insurance simply because we didn't put the right amount into each pot 20 years ago. We've got the money, Americans have paid for it, so this 20% cut is fictitious if we want to be serious about Americans who've earned this. And again, remembering that most Americans who are on disability, SSDI, work for over 20 years paying into the system. Having said all that, let's also make sure that we get rid of another confusion. There are about 30 million Americans, working Americans, who are disabled. Not all of them qualify for SSDI. Only the most severely disabled do. That's why only around 9 million of those close to 30 million actually receive Social Security disability insurance. So the population we're talking about is not all disabled Americans, it's those with the severest of impairments. And the folks that we're talking about specifically today aren't just disability insurance beneficiaries, it's those who are trying to go to work, because so many of them have no opportunity to go to work. In fact, there's a study that shows that close to 1 in 5 Social Security disability insurance beneficiaries die within 5 years of qualifying for the benefit. That's how disabled they are. Okay, so now we're talking about this universe of those who really want to work. I think there's universal agreement here. If we can help them get to work, if we can provide incentive, let's do it. But I think Mr. Teaberry's chart was very illustrative. If I looked at that chart correctly, this offset to me is troubling, because I look at this chart, and for those who want to work and start working, if you start doing an offset so that you lose a dollar in benefit, disability benefit for every $2 you earn and work, just about everybody that earns less than $1,100 is going to lose, come out a loser at the end of the day. So I ask a question to anyone who wishes to answer. Are we in this to create an incentive program that creates winners and losers, where the less able to work are punished to try to help those who can work?
Time of the gentleman has expired.
I don't know if anyone, Mr. Chairman, if I could just try to get a quick response from anyone. And
we'll give you 2 seconds.
And a yes or no is
I would just, I would add that we're not, for goodness sakes, do not penalize people. And of course not. That's not the intent. We should be incentivizing. I would add, I know it's not going to be a popular statement, but the ticket to work, and I know that's affecting 90,000 people or so, in many ways, the ticket to nowhere, because we're incentivizing VR agencies rather than incentivizing the individual. Yeah. If I go back to work, let me keep the money. Why are you giving it to somebody else to help me get back to work? Businesses want the connection. Businesses want me to work. I have skills and talent to work. Only 85% or 15% of people are born with a disability who have it. The rest of us have education and work skills and experience. Just incentivize us to go to work. And so I know this is complex with this offset. It is not intended, I don't think you're hearing it's intended to hurt people. It's all about this, doing it cost neutral. If you will let me work, believe me, you're going to be getting more revenue and more income from me. So, Congressman, I'm hopeful that it isn't interpreted that way.
Thank you.
Others?
Thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired.
Thank you all very much.
Mr. Price, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I want to thank you for holding this hearing. This has been fascinating. And Mr. Ssi, I'm struck by your passion, and I appreciate it. And I want to pick up on what you just said in response to the previous question, and that is, you're telling me that some of this money gets sidelined and doesn't go to the worker?
I'm sorry, sir?
What you just said is, let us go to work, but let us keep the money. But you mentioned that the money was going elsewhere.
What I was talking about is the ticket to work.
Yes.
Actually incentivizes a rehab company that helps me go to work, because Social Security rewards them. They take my Social Security benefit and gives it to them to put me to work. And when I'm saying, stop that. Let me keep it. I'm the one that's going to work, and so reward me or incentivize me for going to work. So again, I know that's controversial because there are people using the ticket. There are people that's helping some people. I just think we're pointing it the wrong way.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. Look, as I said, this has been fascinating to hear the testimony. I'm a physician. I was an orthopedic surgeon, so I've done hundreds, if not thousands, of disability evaluations. And one thing that I was struck with when I was in practice, in medical practice, is that the program is static. It says that if you've got this disease, or if you've got this problem, or you got this disability, that's it.
that you are punished to consider going back into the program for fear that you might lose the disability insurance or the payment. Mr. Smith, have you had any experience with that in the programs that you've run? Is that a real fear? I know it was a fear that many of my patients described.
Absolutely, and it was clear from one of the for example, some of the folks that we had in the benefit offset who did for a period of time have a gradual ramp down. When the pilot ended and the ramp down went away, we estimated about half of those folks then reduced their earnings because of their fear of being losing eligibility for the program. So yeah, I think it's very powerful. I also want to point out, Mike mentioned the Ticket to Work program, and I'm chuckling because I'm one of those voc rehab providers that gets, well, we're one of those providers that gets paid under the Ticket to Work program. But the Ticket to Work program is based on VR agencies and employment networks are paid if a person zeroes out their cash benefit. And it presents, for me, it presents a conflict of interest because I'm sitting in front of a beneficiary and under the current rules, I get paid if he or she works themselves off of benefits. But there are definitely situations when that's clearly not in that person's financial best interests. So obviously my staff and my program, give people the correct information to make sure that there's no, that they're not harmed, and if they do choose to go off the program, it's that they're fully informed. But there's a clear conflict of interest for us in that, we essentially could be paid for something that's not in the individual's
provides a
financial best
disincentive.
interest.
I want to touch with you, Mr. Smith, a little more though on the because I'm struck by the experience that you have with an alternative program, this benefits offset, and the real life examples that you can provide and have provided about how that incentivizes individuals to get back to work when they want to. Because the 4% number doesn't seem like you got 40% of the folks out there say that they want to work, and we got 4% of the folks who are actually working. So do you have statistics or a comparison of this benefits offset program that you have, the pilot that you have experience with?
It wouldn't speak to, our pilot was a small short-term pilot, so it wouldn't provide data on how many people could potentially, on a nationwide level, participate in the program. What I do know is in my state, like 10% of the SSDI population is engaged in our program, which means they've raised their hands and said, yes, I want to go to work. And obviously there are many other people who don't want VR services who are probably also trying to return to work. So I'm a bit more optimistic perhaps than others on the potential that folks can return to work and work at higher levels.
Great, I appreciate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Mr. Doggett, you're
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I suppose it is encouraging that this hearing began with Chairman Ryan telling us not to worry about the prospects of a 20% across-the-board benefit cut for disability recipients next year. I see only one major problem with that, and that is that a partisan rule was adopted at the beginning of this Congress to prohibit the Congress from resolving this issue as we have 11 times before, and that is to recognize, as Mr. Becerra said, that this fund distinction is artificial and that one way of solving the problem, independent of our discussion, important discussion of work this morning, is to do a fund transfer. And that rule says that you have to solve this 20% cut by either raising taxes, and we know they're committed to not raising taxes, or finding some other way to cut the amount of money being spent on disability payments in order to make up for the 20%. So the complete statement should be there won't be a 20% benefit cut because we're planning to find some other way to cut disability payments to make up for what would be necessary to avoid a 20% payment cut. Beyond that point, this morning's hearing begins to look in a more sophisticated way like the standard Republican stump speech. That the only thing that is wrong is that poor people don't work hard enough, and that bureaucrats get in the way with red tape and unnecessary regulations. Dr. Vanderwater, I want to ask you about the type of people first who are getting disability. As Mr. Becerra pointed out, it's not all the disabled people in the country. It's only someone that a judge has determined has a mental or physical impairment which prohibits them from performing substantial gainful activity at any job in the national economy. Is that basically the standard that applies before someone begins receiving a disability check?
Yes, that's the standard.
And in fact, as far as men who receive disability checks, some of them are in such bad condition that I believe it's about 1 in 5 of them actually die within 5 years of getting their first check.
Yes, the death rate for disability insurance beneficiaries is much higher than for
I very much believe in
other
work,
folk.
and I appreciate the testimony that's been given here this morning. I think we need to provide incentives for people to work and remove any disincentives that exist. But in terms of whether we can just have disabled poor people work their way out of this 20% cut and solve the problem that way, if you actually provide more incentives like this 2-for-1 payment instead of an absolute cliff, doesn't it end up costing more for the system and not less?
That's exactly right.
And so and you mentioned that's true of administrative cost and otherwise. So I guess really the question is, do those who believe in work, and I certainly do, are they willing to pay more out of the Disability Trust Fund to encourage work, to incentivize work, rather than to pay less? And I don't see any indication that they're willing to do that. In fact, they're talking about cuts that would be very severe if you offset everything you do about incentivizing work. Won't you actually reduce benefits to many more people than you help? Won't you hurt more people than you help?
Well, you're absolutely right, Mr. Doggett, that providing work incentives obviously is what we're all talking about here this morning, but trying to do that and also save money at the same time is very difficult. You've heard the issues about starting, what the problems involved if one started a benefit offset at less than the $1,090 a month substantial gainful activity level. You heard a story one of the other witnesses told about the problems created by the ticket to work and its effort to save money in the process of encouraging beneficiaries to return to work. And we failed when Mr. Tieberry was asking us about work incentive simplification. One of the things which
let me just interrupt you as the time goes down to say, is there enough red tape, change in work rules, and more work that people could do if incentivized that would be enough to make up for this 20% cut that's about to take place?
No, by no means.
Not even close, is it?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Doggett. Mr. Smith, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to our witnesses for sharing your expertise and insight today. I know I hear from constituents who find the program's work incentives difficult to understand and actually who have unexpectedly had their benefits turned off because they crossed the earnings threshold without realizing it. Just frustration in general in so many ways, and especially looking at the forward timeline of the solvency concerns. We've waited a long time, and it appears there will be no way to actually keep DI solvent, as you know, without transferring funds into the program, most likely probably from the Old Age and Survivors Trust Fund. Without reform, we will reach the point of insolvency again, not just with DI, but with the old age account and with Medicare, and many concerns across the board there. Ms. Houghton, in your testimony, you note that while businesses aren't experts on DI, the obstacles individuals can face can cause them to reduce their hours, limit their earnings, quit their job, or not try to return to work at all. Do you think a benefit offset would make it easier for people to try to work more hours increase their earnings or take a promotion?
Absolutely. I think that right now, the way the rules are, you have to be a rocket scientist to figure out how to make work pay.
That's very interesting, and speaking to the complexity, and I know my colleagues have just kind of pointed to the various channels that are pursued because of the complexity, and really I would hope we could avoid the complexity and the expenses associated with that. So with that, I yield back. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Ms. Jenkins, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding this hearing, and I want to thank the panel for the great discussion this morning. Special thanks to Mrs. Houghton. It's always great to see a native Kansan, a KU alum, and a former Bob Dole intern before us. It's been nice to find a little common ground with our colleagues on the other side of the aisle here this morning as well. I've long been an advocate for mental health and services to help those who deal with mental illness. And I noted in Mr. Kriegel's testimony that almost half of the younger beneficiaries, which to me means under 50, have mental impairments. This is compared to roughly 30% of all beneficiaries. Since these folks are facing a lifetime of challenges, it really is important to focus on helping them return to work. So, Mr. Smith, it seems your pilot program had some findings in this area. And I just am curious, working to see with those suffering with mental illness, what you feel their likelihood of returning to work is and what we can do as policymakers to help that happen.
Sure. So there's a very well-researched approach to supporting folks with psychiatric disabilities return to work called the IPS, or Individual Placement and Support Model, out of the New Hampshire Dartmouth Psychiatric Research Center next door to us in Vermont. And I think Bob Drake has been, that program has been studied in a Social Security demonstration. And while I'm not familiar with that demonstration, I did talk to Bob Drake, who ran it for Dartmouth. And he said, the IPS approach clearly helps people in multiple random assignment studies has shown it can get younger folks with psychiatric disabilities back to work. But he found that then they ran up against, once folks started to really get their feet wet and start moving towards employment, they ran into the cash cliff. And so the findings ended up not sort of saving Social Security funds because they were running into the cash cliff. So yeah, this is again why I'm somewhat more optimistic about the potential of folks, especially younger folks with psychiatric disabilities, to if they're given time and given the right incentives to get themselves to a position where they can increase their earnings and have a better life.
Okay, great. Thanks. I yield back.
Thank you. Mr. Larson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank Chair and Mr. Levin for this hearing. I especially want to thank our witnesses for your outstanding testimony and your passion and commitment as well. I find myself associating with the remarks of Mr. Ssdi, especially as it relates to our responsibility. I think your frustration is shared by members on both sides of the aisle here. And I know, based on the honor that the members of this committee bring to this effort, that there is a path forward, and we just simply have to find it. I'm going to yield a portion of my time. Mr. Becerra didn't get an answer on the question that he posed at the end of his statement. And then after you answer, I'll just have a suggestion. But I deeply appreciate both what the committee is doing in this respect and trying to resolve this issue, both the short term and long term. But Mr. Becerra, I'll yield to you to finish your question that you had asked.
I thank Mr. Larson for yielding, and let me just pose it again quickly because I don't want to use up any more time than necessary. So if you do the offsets, if you start to, at a lower level, to remove some of the disability insurance benefit for money earned, so in the case of this example given, if you lose $1 of your disability insurance earned benefit for every $2 you make in wages, and you start it early, instead of at $1,090, which is the full disability benefit, you started early, you got a whole bunch of folks at that early stage, up to $1,000 or so, who are getting cut their benefit, even if they have a chance to earn money. Many of them are not able to earn that much, but they still get the cut. And so my question was, are we interested in creating losers in this? Are we interested in punishing people as we try to create an incentive to let those who can, as Mr. Ssdi was able to, earn more money? And so are we looking to punish those who don't have the ability to earn more money?
I am not in favor of whacking somebody's benefits, just state that, but I think there's a perception issue that I'd like to address, if I may, Congressman, and that is that when you see that international symbol, and we see it when we park. You've got it here at Congress, we have it at businesses, we have it in our life. We see that international symbol. I wear one that shows somebody carrying a briefcase, meaning that people with disabilities can work. When we see that there's this stereotyping, we talk about mental illness specifically, when you see that, you think, well, what is that? That's someone who needs help, needs a parking spot, medical problem, needs public assistance, lacks education, not working, is a drain on our society, there but for the grace of God go I. Or do we see past that wheelchair, past the eyeglasses, you're not bound, and see a person who is dependable, as businesses have found out, dependable, motivated, and loyal, and healthy. They're not sick. I don't need to be healed. I'm working. I have education, talent. See that, and see that they're with the grace of God go I. So my point is we had this tendency to think that everybody's really poor. Well, they're poor in a system that doesn't work well. That's the reason they're poor. The expectation should be higher, starting early, starting very early with parents. And even at the low teenage years, that yes, there's an expectation of work, and that yes, you'll be part of our society and community, and we have a support system that will bring you on that journey.
And Mr. Ssdi, this is Mr. Larson's time, so if I could just ask if anyone else wishes to comment on this, I open it up to you very quickly because I know Mr. Larson probably has other questions.
Thanks.
Yeah. Congressman Becerra, I really agree that this is an insurance policy, and if we start the offset below the current SGA level, we are effectively cutting the insurance payments for a certain group of individuals. At the same time, we have to recognize that we're talking about people at the subsistence level, at the poverty level, and a reduction in insurance benefits as they make up for that by increasing their earnings may, for some individuals, be a path to greater self-sufficiency. So it's a delicate balance, but your point's well taken.
Thank you.
Time of the gentleman has expired. Mr. Paulson.
I just want to start by thanking the chairman for holding this hearing. This has been some really outstanding testimony based on the wealth of experience that all of you have offered here. And it's interesting because, our constituents back home, they expect us as leaders in Washington to get some things done. And this Social Security Disability Insurance Program is the perfect opportunity for Congress to step in, make progress, come together, and make some real changes that are actually going to really, truly help people. And this is about making sure that those that do rely on that critical income safety net, they're not going to be put in jeopardy, right, from drastic benefit cuts, but also giving those tools and resources that are going to allow those who wish to return to work the opportunity to do so. And unfortunately, as we've heard, and we've heard other stories from back home, but also from the testimony, the SSDI program has become so complex that even those who want to return to work, they have difficulty in navigating that huge web of rules and regulations. The beneficiaries become so overwhelmed or nervous about losing their benefits due to overwork that they may actually stop looking for a job. And, you know, Ms. Houghton, you mentioned actually, you know, you have to be a rocket scientist, right, to kind of figure your way through this. And businesses clearly want to hire and promote the best person for the job. And Ms. Houghton, this is your area of expertise. You work with all these different employers. And we've heard today that for those that are receiving DI benefits, it's not that simple just to say yes to a new job, yes to the next promotion, yes for more hours. It's not that simple. Now, what about employers? How do employers navigate these rules? And if the program was simpler for employers also, do you think that employers could be more effective at providing opportunity for individuals with disabilities?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely, Congressman. Employers don't know how to navigate these rules any better than their employees know how to navigate these rules. And so as a result, they're either losing talent or not having access to talent. If these rules, you know, I think it's clear that everybody wants to make this program work better and wants to help people be able to become employed. And if we could simplify the rules so that you didn't have to be a rocket scientist, that would absolutely help individuals and ultimately help business who wants to hire or retain these beneficiaries.
All right. Well, clearly, I think the groundwork is laid here based on a lot of the comments and testimony on a bipartisan basis. So I really want to thank you again for all the testimony we've had today. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just yield back so we can move on.
Thank you for your questions. Ms. Black, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, I want to thank the panel for being here in this most interesting conversation today. I want to thank the chairman for holding this hearing. When I first came here to Congress in 2010, I was on the Human Resource Committee, and that was my first time in understanding about the fund going defunct in 2016. And so I've been anxious about this now for 5 years. I'm glad we're finally getting a hearing. One of the things that I did was to try to better understand this system, because as this chart shows, this is very complicated. You all know that. I think the audience and those at home that are home watching need to see this chart as well to understand how complicated it is. And because of that, what I did is I said, I'm going to act as if I am applying for services, and I'm going to start at the beginning and work my way all the way through. And it was very, very enlightening. And we've talked a lot about the cash cliff here, which is a very important piece of this and one of the barriers to getting people back to work. But as I was going through the process, one of the things I heard from the workers that I was so impressed with, those who I met with and the workers that were really trying to help the beneficiary get everything that they needed at the same time to help them get back to work, was the whole issue of the lack of services there for those who, as has already been said in the testimonies that we have, let me see here, 70% of those that are applying are 50 years or older with a limited education and a limited amount of work experience to translate from whatever they were doing into something new. And there was a lot of frustration there, even though there are voc rehab programs, in getting someone from where they are back into the workforce, because the human capital is a big piece of that. And that is something that I did here, is that people who are not able to get back to work then go into depression. And there's a lot of things that occur as a result of them not being able to feel like they're self-sufficient, that they are worthy. And so that really worried me, and that's a component I don't think we speak enough about. Mr. Kriegel, I found it interesting in your testimony, and I highlighted this, the lack of training and support services are frequently cited by beneficiaries as a major obstacle to employment. Training and education to launch a new career who or need specialized employment services have achieved mixed results. Can you help me from your perspective, on what can we do better to help somebody to be able to transition, especially those that are at the lower income with the lower education, to get them back into that workforce?
In addition to the individuals who say an obstacle to my employment is the work incentives and those kinds of things, they also say things like, there's no jobs in my community that I can do. They also say there's no one to help me get a job. Employers don't think that I can do a job for them, and those kinds of things. And so the issue is to get connections between those individuals and the business sector, which is very accommodating and very willing to hire these individuals. So for low-income individuals who have significant health problems, it's a particularly daunting task, but the idea is there are people out there, employers, who are not the problem, who will accept you if we can enable folks to make that connection with them. So the recruitment is just as important as the retention work that employers do to keep people who have had injuries or illnesses on the job retained and stay in employment.
And Ms. Halton, that's where I want to say thank you for the work that you're doing, because I know in your testimony you said there are challenges finding the talent and navigating the governmental system for these employers is very difficult. I'm very excited about what you're doing, but can you help me in how we might be able to help you do a better job in getting these employers to where they need to be to get folks that are hired and placed in the right places?
You know, obviously we've got a lot of work to do, but if ever there was a time, it's now. And we need these systems. We need the education system. We need the vocational rehabilitation system. We need the workforce system to help people with disabilities focus on what they can do and how they can do it, so that as they interface with business, folks aren't talking about what they can't do, but they're talking about what they can do and how they can get the job done.
Thank you. That's very helpful, and I would really like to be able to stay in touch with you to see how we might actually be able to do that in some form, not necessarily in a bill, but working with those existing forces that we have currently and beefing those up and making those better. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back the balance of my time.
Thank you. Mr. Davis, do you care to question?
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and I ask unanimous consent to have entered into the record an article from the Washington Post printed on January 7th, 2015.
So ordered.
Thank you very much, and I want to thank you for the hearing. I certainly want to thank all of the witnesses for their participation in this very serious, sanguine, rational, what I call logical discussion of a way to look at trying to be of benefit and help some of the most vulnerable members of our society. And so I relish the fact that we have talked about the Social Security disability insurance, realizing that there are no simple solutions to very complex issues and very complex problems. But at the end of the day, I think we have to remember that no matter what happens, these are individuals who have worked for their disability insurance. It is indeed insurance and not a mean-tested program. These workers paid for their benefit over decades of hard work, and they've earned their Social Security benefits. In Illinois alone, we have 289,730 DI recipients, 18,601 in my district alone. The monthly average payment for a disabled worker in Illinois covers less than half of the actual amount they earned before disability. And if you consider the fact that rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Chicago is $1,752 a month. anyone on DI can hardly make a living. I agree that we must do everything that we possibly can to get as many of these individuals back into the workforce with meaningful jobs. But at the same time, we cannot neglect the needs of the majority of recipients who have worked hard to pay into the trust fund all their lives. Cutting the benefit amount or altering program eligibility would take away already scarce resources of many vulnerable Americans. Dr. Vanderwater, I'd like to ask you this one question. Considering the fact that since 2011, Social Security has received an average of $1 billion a year less than it needed to administer its programs, even though the number of Americans collecting earned Social Security benefits has grown by 7.5 million. Could SSA administer a benefit offset program accurately within its current congressionally provided benefit? And how have the budget shortages affected SSA's ability to administer the current work incentives that already exist?
Mr. Davis, I mean, as another witness has indicated, I think that the Social Security Administration is quite capable of administering a benefit offset, but that if the funding is short, as you point out, that will provide a practical impediment to doing the job well. One of the themes I think that's emerged from this morning's hearing is that there are a number of ways to encourage disability insurance beneficiaries to work, but many, if not all of them, are going to cost money, whether that is administering a benefit offset, whether it's doing additional continuing disability reviews, whether it's providing work simplification of the sort that Mr. Tieberry was asking about. All of these things require either program money or administrative money, and the attempt to achieve these goals and reduce program spending at the same time is probably is an overly constrained problem. That shortage of funding is key.
The bottom line is you can't get blood out of a turnip. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
And again, thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Mr. Davis. Mr. Renacci.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for holding this hearing. I want to thank the witnesses. I've been sitting here listening to all the testimony, and I realize there's no silver bullet to fix this shortfall that we're going to have next year, and I don't think this hearing was about finding that silver bullet to fix the shortfall next year. I do think the hearing, though, was about promoting opportunity for disability insurance beneficiaries. And so keeping with that theme, I think back of a couple constituents in my district, and I always try and go back and think of constituents in my district and how we can change things for those constituents. So there are some constituents out there that I know that would like to work. They're on disability insurance. They see a very difficult system to get into. They deserve to get into it, and they have gotten into it. Now they're fearful they're going to lose it. In fact, I ran into one of them the other day and said, if you see the complicated form I got to report back on, I'm not sure if I make the wrong election or say the wrong thing, I'm going to lose everything. But these are also people who would like to work, too. So, and I agree. I'm hearing some things that, you know, if you change the payout system, in fact, Mr. Ssdi, you even mentioned, let them keep all their DI payments. Well, it's an interesting concept because, you know, if people could do that, and still work, there probably is an incentive. But again, it doesn't fix the system. But I think the goal here was really promoting opportunity. So, and the other thing, and when you say that, and I'm not saying that's the answer, I was sitting here thinking if the more that they're able to make, the more wages they're able to make, the more Social Security they pay actually back in on those wages. So there is some benefit to that. But the other thing I keep hearing today is the system doesn't work well, it's too complex. it's overwhelming, and that's actually what I'm hearing from my constituents that I know are on the system as well, those that want to work. Now, again, there are some that would be very difficult to get back in the job market, but there are some that can. So what I'm trying to do after all of this is figure out what can we do different? What can the system do different? Because, Mr. Crago, I heard you say, you know, that many people just feel there's no jobs in the community, and that's a problem because there are jobs in the community. And I know when I was a business owner for 28 years before I came here, I hired many people that were disabled and put them to work. And there were job opportunities for them. They weren't able to maybe lift, or they weren't able to fix a car in the automobile dealership, but they were able to sit at the desk and greet people, and they did a great job. But the question is, so now I'm disabled, I get on the system, and it's a complicated system, and I'm scared I'm going to lose the dollars I'm getting. So what can we do within the system to fix the system? That's really what I'm looking for, so that that individual can have maybe an opportunity for work. Mr. Crago, you have any thoughts there?
I think that one of the advantages of the offset that hasn't been mentioned is that people who are afraid to work at that level presently, I think that there are people who are not working, and they just hear this stuff about, I'm going to lose my benefits. If I work at all, I'm going to lose my benefits, and all of the information or inaccurate information that they receive. So with the offset, it will enable people who are not working at the present time, and I would anticipate it would increase in the percentage of DI beneficiaries who would actually attempt work and go to work, because we create this huge fear for folks at the present time. And then we have to automate the system. The form that you're talking about, the work activity report, the form 821, there's another one we haven't talked about for self-employed individuals. All of those things just create tremendous burden and really fear on the part of individuals. If I say the wrong thing, I'm going to lose my check. If I lose my check, I can't take care of my basic shelter and food. And so those kinds of choices that people are forced to make right now, those are the things that have to be changed if we can.
Could it be as simple as a follow-up from the Social Security Administration saying, hey, have you been looking for work, or there's something we can help you with? That seems like a very simple change that I'm not sure if we're doing. Mr. Ssi, do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, if you're talking about encouraging people to work, absolutely. And, you know, there's this word bureaucracy, and we all get afraid of it, but it's in our lives. And so let's take advantage of it. Let's absolutely encourage people, as you're applying for disability, that there are alternatives. And the 2-to-1 ratio, I think I'm all in on this. You're hearing the panel, that this is a good thing. Because you're not penalized for going to work. That's what we want. The other thing I'll just say, that, if I may, Congressman, that when I was first injured, and I'm laying in intensive care with bolts in my head on a striker frame, thinking, you know, we would depend on our faith and family and friends to get us through, and my life was over. What can I do? I have these children I can't provide for. And my brother-in-law, Gene Hamilton, brought in a fella in a wheelchair, a friend of his, the same level as injuries I had, and he started talking about life in a wheelchair, and come to find out, he was a stockbroker making a lot of money. And I thought to myself, it was an epiphany. Well, if he can do it, if he can have a career, if he can make money, I can do it. And so that just changed everything, that peer support. There's organizations called Center for Independent Living. They're made up of, led by people with disabilities who are working, and I encourage you to support that, engage, and Social Security engage with them early on as people apply. Because when you see somebody else and you get that peer support, it's a bridge to work. It's, yes, I can. So I don't know if I've answered your question.
No, you did. Thank you. And I want to thank all the witnesses. And that's what I'm talking about. We got to make sure, when I go back to those constituents, they just complain about the forms, and they never say to me, hey, it'd be great if somebody would show me how to get back to work, or give me that, as you said, that inspiration that here's an opportunity for me. So thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Reed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Ssi, you just summed it up. That was the best testimony of the day. your story right there. That's what we're trying to do on this side of the aisle, is to promote that work ethic, that opportunity that you sought and you achieved and you recognized in your peers. So I applaud you in your story. I truly and honestly do. And before I ask my question of Mr. Kriegel, I want to just note for the record, what I heard from my colleagues on the other side, Mr. McDermott, about the fact that we're not going to be able to solve this problem because of a rule change, and that we should do what has been the status quo in Washington, D.C. for 11 times and multiple times over the decade, is just transfer for the retirees into the Disability Trust Fund, and that will solve this problem. It doesn't solve the problem. It takes what is a $270 billion problem today that we're facing in 2016 with the Disability Trust Fund, kicks it down to 2031 or 2033, and couples it with a $3.7 trillion problem. And so if my colleagues on the other side of the aisle think we can't solve a $270 billion problem within the next 18 months, how in the hell are we going to solve a $3.7 trillion problem just 16 years down the road? That's asinine. That is stupidity. And I came here in 2010 to change the status quo, and I'm standing here and seizing this opportunity in the Disability Trust Fund to implement reforms that are going to help people. And your story inspires me to continue in that effort, Mr. Ssi, and I appreciate it. We had a chance on the subcommittee, Social Security Subcommittee, to have the Social Security Administration come before us. And during that questioning, I pulled up the Red Book, and I gave it to the Social Security Administrator who writes it. And I said, you know, this book says it's written in plain English language. That's the goal of the book, right, when you read the introduction. And I just flipped open the page. And I'm sure I'm looking at the smiles of the witnesses. You've read this book, right? This is DC speak like I wouldn't believe. This is not plain English. My favorite, the EPE begins the month after the TWP ends. If you're not working that month, the first 36 months of the EPA is your entitlement period. Then you got to deal with the SGA. Then the EPE is different than the EPX or the EXR. That's not plain English to me, ladies and gentlemen. So, Mr. Kriegel, you're contracted by Social Security Administration to teach counselors how to help people with the Work Incentive Program. How long does that program take?
We would say in our training program that between training and testing and ongoing support, it takes about a year to get to a basic level of competence.
So 1 year to train a professional to help beneficiaries figure out the Social Security Work Incentive Program is essentially what I heard from your testimony. Is that accurate?
Yes, to help beneficiaries directly, yes.
To help a beneficiary counselor who's going to help a beneficiary.
Right.
So it takes 1 year to teach them this program. Right. And so our beneficiaries who don't have the benefit of that training, who don't have that level of professionalism when they deal with this situation, they're expected to know what this work incentive is on their own because of a red book given to them by the Social Security Administration. Is that that's generally the position of the administration?
That's sort of where the state of the art is right now.
Yeah, see, that's the problem. So when I read your testimony, I was so impressed with, and we saw common ground. Mr. T-Berry's question led to common ground, that we need to simplify this program. We need to simplify the work incentive program. So let's take it one step further, Mr. Kriegel. You are clearly an expert in this area. What are the top 3 things we can do to simplify this work incentive program from your perspective and your experience?
Well, I think that the first thing is to always make work pay. Really try to work so that you're never going to go wrong betting on the willingness and the ability of individuals with disabilities who want to pursue their work goals. They want to work like everybody else. They have their own personal lives, and they really need to do it. So what we want to do is make sure that people who can't go to work, we want to help them. People who want to work, we want to have the focus of doing everything that we possibly can to assist those individuals. The second thing that we really need to do is reduce the burden on the beneficiary at various points in time. If you look at this particular chart, each one of these squares could be expanded into another couple charts in terms of what happens in this instance and what happens in this instance, what happens that we haven't talked about if you're self-employed and you run your own business. So reducing burden of individuals who want to go back to work to get past this mailing stuff and doing it in a way that simplifies it from their perspective would really, really be helpful. And then we have to get to accurate information. So the ability of the local field offices to the service providers in VR and other places to actually provide the right information, or make sure then that they follow up and make sure the individual understands that information so that people aren't making wrong decisions based on what they think is the right information but is erroneous information, and it ends up causing major turmoil in their life as a result of an overpayment.
I appreciate those suggestions, and what I hear is proactive, get into it early, educate individuals, and then stand with those individuals as they go back to work.
Correct.
Thank you. With that, I yield back.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. I thought this was a very insightful hearing, and I hope that we can move in a bipartisan way. I heard some partisan comments. Hopefully that's not what's to come, because I think you can see that we have a deep interest in avoiding this problem, this 20% cut, in making work pay and making this law work like we all want it to work. So I want to thank each of you for bringing your fantastic testimony. It's very enlightening. This hearing stands adjourned.